We tend to talk about who we are as if it's, set in stone, like a blueprint.
Right, something permanent.
But what if? What if our identity is actually much more dynamic, even fractal?
Fractal. Interesting term.
Yeah, it comes from this really fascinating piece of Korean philosophical writing we looked at. It suggests identity isn't fixed, but this constantly shifting pattern. The same kinds of patterns showing up at tiny scales and huge scales in our lives.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Welcome, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling, well, maybe the biggest question: what is identity?
And this Korean text gives such a different angle. They talk about conceptual dissolution.
Which sounds complex, but the idea...
The core idea is pretty straightforward, actually.
Sure.
It argues our personalities, they aren't these fixed things we're born with.
Mm-hmm.
They're more like traces,
Mm-hmm.
leftovers almost, from behaviors we've repeated over and over.
It's a total reframing.
It really is.
And what's wild is how this idea echoes in, completely different areas. Neuroscience, music, architecture.
Even spiritual practices, yeah.
We're going to connect those dots. And honestly, I think understanding identity this way as a fractal pattern, it could be, well, incredibly freeing.
Absolutely. So let's get into it.
Okay, let's start with something simple. You know when you say, oh, I'm just not a morning person?
Or I'm just an anxious person.
Ah.
We all have those lines, right?
Exactly. What are we really describing there? Most of us, I think, we operate on this assumption, maybe unconsciously.
Yeah, that our personality is like permanent hardware, like you said, set in stone.
Yeah. Or like software you can't update.
But this is where the Korean text gets really interesting. And it lines up so well with, say, modern neuroscience.
So.
Well, these things we call natural traits, they might just be the result, the accumulation of tiny choices we've made again and again.
Okay.
Like, think about anxiety. Every time you react anxiously, you're actually physically strengthening that neural pathway in your brain.
Right. Makes it easier to be anxious next time.
Yeah. Exactly. Or hitting snooze. Every time you do that, you're reinforcing the not a morning person story. It's a pattern being built.
The Korean philosophers, they put it so clearly. They say our attitudes, our postures, they aren't fixed characteristics. They're accumulated traces of behavioral patterns chosen moment by moment.
Moment by moment, that's key.
So when I say I'm just this kind of person, what I'm really saying is this is the response pattern I've chosen most often in the past.
You're describing your history, not necessarily your essence.
Right. It's a description based on data, not some unchanging core.
And here's the kicker.
Oh.
Most of the time, we're not even consciously choosing these responses anymore, are we?
Probably not.
We're just running on autopilot, like emotional muscle memory, just doing the same dance steps without thinking.
Okay, so before we dive deeper, maybe take a second, everyone listening. Think of one trait you feel is really, truly you.
Something fundamental.
Yeah. Just hold on to that thought. We're going to explore what might be really going on under the surface there. Now, this is where it gets really cool for me, seeing this same pattern pop up in totally different places.
Yeah, the cross connections are fascinating.
Okay, let's take music. You know how a repeated rhythm or like a little melodic phrase, it kind of defines the whole piece. It sets the mood, the feeling, the identity of the music comes from that repetition.
Absolutely. It creates the atmosphere.
Well, maybe our emotional rhythms, our go-to responses work the same way. They become the soundtrack of our personality.
That's a great analogy. And neuroscience gives us a mechanism for that, right? Hebb's law.
Remind us.
Neurons that fire together wire together.
Right.
So the more often you use certain emotional circuits, certain behavioral pathways,
the stronger they get.
Exactly. They become more automatic. It's like you're carving grooves in your brain, basically, in your consciousness.
And it's not just internal, is it? Think about architecture.
Okay.
A building-style Gothic arches repeating over and over, or those clean, modernist lines.
Yeah, the repetition defines it.
Right. The identity isn't just one big thing. It's built from those repeated elements, pattern on pattern.
And you could argue our internal postures, our habitual ways of thinking and feeling, they do the same thing. They create let's call it the architectural style of our mind.
Oh, I like that. The architectural style of our mind.
It's that consistent repetition, even if it's subtle, that shapes the whole structure.
My favorite analogy, though, the one that really hit me, is from theater.
Okay.
Think about an actor playing a role night after night. Eventually on stage, that role starts to feel real, like it is them.
They embody it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this Korean text makes this incredible leap. It says, maybe we're all actors on the stage of our own lives.
Wow.
And the quote is just perfect. Identity is performed habit.
Performed habit. So identity is just the role we've practiced the most.
That's the idea. Is profound, isn't it?
It really is. And you see this echoed in spiritual traditions, too.
How so?
Think about practices like meditation or prayer or chanting, done repeatedly.
Yep.
It's not just about feeling calm in that moment. Over time, those repeated actions actually start to restructure the person's baseline attitude, their presence.
So it changes who they are, fundamentally.
Exactly. Identity level change driven by repetition.
It's just amazing how this single principle shows up everywhere.
Yeah.
Neurons, music, buildings, theater, spirituality.
It's the fractal nature again.
Yeah, the core idea. Microscopic repetition creates macroscopic identity. That feels like the key.
That's the power of it, I think.
So let's zoom out a bit. Let's really grasp this bigger pattern, because this is where it gets, well, potentially life-changing.
Okay.
The basic principle seems undeniable, right? Small, repeated actions build up into big structural patterns.
Like bricks forming a wall.
Exactly. So our tiny, everyday choices, they're literally, bit by bit, constructing the story of who we are.
And you called it fractal earlier. That's because this same pattern repetition building structure happens at every level.
Explain that more.
Okay, so a momentary choice. Say, responding with curiosity instead of getting defensive in one conversation.
All right.
It shakes that single interaction. Now, repeat that pattern of choosing curiosity.
It starts to shape your relationships.
Right. And if you repeat that across many relationships, it starts to shape your social identity, how people see you, how you see yourself.
And then?
Keep repeating it, and it influences your whole life story, your career choices, your well-being. See? Same pattern, different scales.
That's what the Korean philosophers mean by multi-level structured patterns.
Precisely. Our habits aren't just mental or just physical. They're neurological, emotional, physical, social, all at once. Interconnected.
Okay. But here's the really beautiful part, the truly liberating part.
Which is?
If identity is made through repetition,
then
it can be remade.
Yes, through different repetition. The mechanism that built you is still there, still accessible. You can change the input.
Think about what that actually means. You're not stuck.
Yeah.
Who you've been doesn't dictate who you have to be. Your personality isn't some kind of life sentence.
I love that. Not a life sentence. It's more like imagine a dance you've practiced for so long.
You forgot you made up the steps.
Exactly. You forgot you were the choreographer.
Right.
But you were, and you still are.
Which means
you can learn new steps. You can change the dance.
Wow. Okay. So as you're hearing this, maybe just notice, is there a habitual response pattern popping into your mind right now?
Something you do on autopilot.
Yeah. Just noticing it, just seeing the pattern. That's powerful. That's the first step toward maybe choosing a different dance.
Awareness is key.
So, practically speaking, what does this mean day to day? How do we use this? The Korean text gives this idea, this crystallized insight.
And it's simple but deep. Identity is the reverberation of repeated choices.
Reverberation, like an echo.
Exactly. Our responses, anxiety, defense, whatever, they become like, well, we said emotional muscle memory.
Right.
Repeated postures, attitudes. They solidify. They become the mind's choreography.
But, crucially.
But this choreography was learned. It was created through practice.
Which means it can be changed through different practice.
That's the core.
This just changes everything, doesn't it? Instead of thinking, I am this fixed thing that needs changing, you realize I am an ongoing process, a composition I'm constantly writing.
Or rewriting.
Yeah. So identity isn't a noun, something you have.
It's a verb, something you do.
Repeatedly. That's the key word again.
And the text sums it up brilliantly. Self-identity is not fixed, but rather a fractal pattern of habituated choices.
That can be restructured through conscious intervention.
Conscious intervention. We can step in.
We can choose differently.
Think about that power. Every moment is an opportunity to practice being just slightly different.
Every response is like a vote.
A vote for the kind of person you're becoming. Wow. And this isn't just nice philosophical talk, is it?
No, it's practical neuroscience.
Yeah.
When you consciously choose to respond differently than your usual pattern,
You're literally rewiring your brain.
you're building new neural pathways, weakening the old ones, strengthening new ones, one choice at a time. Okay, so we have this incredible insight. How do we actually, do it?
Right, the application. The Korean text suggests 3 really practical ways to start. Simple, but effective.
Let's hear them.
First step. Daily observation.
Just watching yourself.
Yeah, but without judgment. That's important. Just start noticing your repeated patterns, your go-to attitudes.
Like, when do I automatically get defensive or jump to worrying?
Exactly. What are those familiar emotional postures you slip into without even thinking?
Okay. So just notice, maybe jot them down.
Yeah, keeping notes can be really helpful, not to beat yourself up about it, but just to see clearly.
Yeah.
What's my current choreography?
Because you can't change what you don't see.
Precisely. Awareness first. That's step one.
Okay, what's step 2?
Conscious reframing. This builds right on the observation.
How does that work?
The text gives a great example, moving from a defensive stance to a curious one.
So instead of, why is this awful thing happening to me, you consciously practice asking, okay, what can I learn here? Or is there an opportunity hidden in this challenge? It's not about pretending you don't feel the initial defensiveness.
Not at all. You acknowledge that feeling. There's that old pattern. But then you pause, and you consciously practice a different response.
You're choosing a different practice. Changing what you do, not trying to magically change who you are overnight.
Exactly. It's a shift in action, in practice.
Okay, observation, reframing. What's the third one?
Creative expression.
Like art. How does that help?
The text suggests using it as a tool to really grasp how patterns create identity. You could literally use colors or shapes.
Wow.
Maybe draw or paint your current habitual emotional patterns. Use repetition visually. Then create another piece showing the patterns you want to cultivate.
So making the internal patterns visible, concrete.
Yeah, it helps internalize the idea. It makes the abstract concept of patterns feel more real and changeable.
That makes sense.
And the overall point of all this isn't, instant transformation.
Right. It's a process.
It's about becoming conscious that you are always becoming someone, whether you realize it or not.
And then choosing to participate in that process intentionally.
Exactly. Shifting from asking, who am I, to who am I choosing to become, moment by moment.
Okay, let's just let that sink in for a moment. We've covered a lot.
We have.
We've seen identity not as fixed, but as this dynamic fractal pattern built from repeated choices.
And how that same principle works in music, in architecture, even in acting.
The same forces shaping art and buildings are shaping us, our psychology.
But the most crucial piece, the real takeaway, I think,
Yeah.
is that the very mechanism that creates who you are right now.
The repetition, the practice.
Yes, that mechanism is always available. It can be used to create your next self.
You're not stuck.
You are not doomed to repeat the past. You're not even required to be exactly who you were 5 minutes ago.
You're a dynamic system.
Constantly updating, constantly evolving based on the choices you make.
Okay. So here's a challenge for everyone listening, something to try.
A practical application.
Exactly. For the next week, just pick one habitual response pattern. Could be anything, how you react when you get stressed, how you greet someone, how you think about a certain task.
Just one pattern?
Just one. And every time that situation comes up, try to pause. Just for 3 seconds before you react automatically.
A brief pause.
And in that pause, ask yourself the simple question. What would I choose right now if I were consciously practicing being the person I want to become?
Powerful question.
Don't stress about getting it perfect. It's not about success or failure.
It's about the practice itself.
It's about realizing every moment is practice, and you get to choose what you're practicing. So as you go about your day,
Think about that.
remember every response is practice. Every choice is a vote, and every single moment is a chance to consciously join in the amazing ongoing creation of yourself.